The message came at midnight, and it came with soldiers. Sergeant Cale Morrow was cleaning his rifle in the barracks on Station Rel 4, a cold and forgotten military outpost on the edge of Velani space. He had been there for 11 months. Nothing ever happened on Rel 4. The food was bad, the air recyclers hummed too loud, and the only entertainment was watching cargo ships drift past the viewport like slow, fat fish. So when 4 Velani royal guards appeared at his door, tall and shining with that pale blue glow their species carried under their skin, Cale thought he was dreaming. "Sergeant Morrow," the lead guard said. His voice was flat. He looked at Cale the way someone might look at a stain on a nice shirt. "You will come with us, now." Cale looked at his half-assembled rifle. He looked at the guards. Their armor was white and gold, polished to a mirror finish. They carried plasma lances that cost more than everything Cale had ever owned combined. "Can I put on pants first?" he asked. They let him put on pants. The ship they brought him to was a royal courier vessel, sleek and silent, the kind of ship that moved through space like a knife through water. Cale sat in a holding room with no windows and no explanation for 6 hours. He asked the guard outside his door what was happening. The guard did not answer. He asked again an hour later. The guard told him to be quiet. Cale was not good at being quiet, but he tried. When the ship finally docked, he felt the gravity change. It became lighter, smoother, like the planet itself was being polite. He knew then where he was. There was only one place in the Dominion with gravity tuned to such perfection. Ithara Prime, the capital world, the seat of the Velani Empire. Cale had never been here. Most humans never came here. Humanity had been part of the Dominion for only 40 years, ever since the Velani had discovered Earth and decided, in their calm and ancient way, that humans were interesting enough to keep around but not important enough to respect. Humans served in the lower ranks of the military, worked in the engine rooms of ships, built things and fixed things and did the jobs that Velani considered beneath them. They did not visit the capital. They certainly did not visit the palace. But the guards marched Cale through the streets of Ithara Prime, past towers of crystal and light that stretched so high they disappeared into the clouds, past fountains that sang with harmonic vibrations, past Velani citizens who stopped and stared at the short, stocky, dull-skinned human being escorted through their beautiful city like a prisoner. The royal spire rose above everything else. It was less a building and more a monument to power. It twisted upward like a frozen flame, white and silver, glowing from within. Cale had to tilt his head all the way back to see the top, and even then he could not find it. Inside, the halls were wide enough to fly a shuttle through. The walls pulsed with soft light. Everything was designed for beings who were tall and thin and graceful, beings whose bones were hollow and whose skin shimmered like starlight on water. Cale, who was 5 feet 10 inches of dense muscle and scar tissue, felt like a rock dropped into a glass cathedral. They brought him to a room deep inside the spire. It was not a throne room, but it felt like one. The ceiling was high and dark, dotted with tiny lights that looked like stars. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, and at the far end of the room, standing beside a window that looked out over the entire city, was a Velani woman who made the air feel heavy just by being in it. Queen Salith. She was tall even for a Velani. Her glow was a deep, rich violet, the color of royalty, and it moved under her skin like slow lightning. Her face was sharp and angular, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. Her eyes, large and dark and without visible pupils, fixed on Cale as he entered, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt small. "Sergeant Cale Morrow," she said. Her voice was cool and precise, each word placed carefully like a stone in a wall. "Human, age 31 standard years, 12 years of military service, 9 commendations, 4 disciplinary actions." She paused. 2 of which were for disobeying direct orders that would have resulted in the deaths of your unit. Cale stood at attention. "That's correct, Your Grace. You are not afraid of authority." I'm afraid of plenty of things, Your Grace. Authority just isn't one of them. Something moved in the Queen's expression. It might have been amusement, it might have been irritation. With the Vellani, it was hard to tell. She turned slightly and Kale saw that there was someone else in the room. A younger Vellani standing half-hidden behind a pillar of crystal. She was shorter than the Queen by a full head, thin and delicate, with a glow so faint it was almost not there at all. A dim, soft white, like a candle about to go out. She stepped forward when the Queen gestured, and Kale saw her face. She was young. Her features had not yet settled into the sharp angles of adult Vellani beauty. Her eyes were wide and curious, and they locked onto Kale with an intensity that surprised him. "This is my daughter," the Queen said. "Princess Elindra, heir to Prince Thavor's bloodline." Kale bowed his head. "Your Highness." Elindra said nothing, she just watched him. The Queen moved closer. She was a full 2 feet taller than Kale, and she looked down at him with an expression that was impossible to read. "You are wondering why you are here," she said. "The thought has crossed my mind, Your Grace. My daughter's life is in danger. There have been 2 attempts to kill her in the past 3 months. The first was made to look like an accident. The second was not. Our own guards, our own intelligence services have failed to identify the source of these threats. I no longer trust them." She paused and let the weight of those words settle. "I need someone with no connections to the court, no loyalties to any faction, no debts, no ambitions, no ties to any Vellani house or bloodline. I need someone who cannot be bought because they have nothing worth buying. I need someone who will not hesitate because hesitation is not in their nature." She looked at Kale, and for the first time her voice carried something that might have been desperation, hidden deep beneath layers of royal composure. "Protect her with your life." Kale looked at the Queen. He looked at the princess, this quiet, dim-glowing girl who watched him with eyes that were far too old for her face. He thought about his barracks on Rel 4, his half-assembled rifle, his boring, safe, meaningless life. "Yes, Your Grace," he said. The Queen nodded once. She did not thank him. She simply turned away and the audience was over. As the guards led Kale toward his new quarters in the princess's wing of the spire, he noticed something. The walls near Elindra's chambers had been recently repaired. The crystal panels were new, brighter than the ones around them, and behind them, if he looked closely, he could see the faint dark marks of scorching. Someone had used explosives here, recently. Kale touched the wall. The new crystal was smooth and cold under his fingers. He had a feeling that his life was about to become very interesting. And in Kale's experience, interesting was just another word for dangerous. The first week was the hardest, not because of danger but because of silence. Princess Elindra did not speak to Kale. She walked through her days with quiet grace, attending her studies in the floating academy gardens above the spire, sitting through long ceremonial dinners with courtiers who smiled at her face and whispered behind her back, and moving through the glowing halls of her home like a ghost who had learned to be invisible. Kale followed her everywhere. He stood outside her classroom doors. He sat at the far end of her dining table, eating food that was designed for Vellani biology and tasted like perfumed cardboard to a human tongue. He walked 3 steps behind her at all times as the protocol demanded, and he watched. The Vellani court did not like him. That became clear on the first day and clearer every day after. "It smells," said Lord Heaven, a tall courtier with a silver glow, speaking to his companion as Kale passed. He did not lower his voice. "The Queen has lost her mind, putting an animal in the princess's shadow." "A short-lived species," his companion agreed. "They barely last a century. What can such a creature understand about protecting a Vellani life?" Kale kept walking. He had heard worse. Humans always heard worse. On the 8th day, Elindra spoke to him for the first time. They were in the academy gardens. a vast platform of living crystal and engineered plants that floated above the city, held aloft by gravity anchors older than human civilization. Elindra was sitting on a bench overlooking the city below, her dim glow almost invisible in the bright sunlight. Her tutors had left. The other students, all children of noble houses, had departed in groups, laughing and glowing, none of them inviting Elindra to join. She looked at Kale, who stood at his usual distance, hands behind his back. "You do not get bored?" she asked. "All the time, Your Highness." "Then why do you not show it?" "Showing it doesn't make it go away." She considered this. Then she tilted her head, a Velani gesture of curiosity that made her look like a bird examining something strange. "Is it true that humans can go without sleep for several days?" "We can. It's not fun, and we get pretty stupid after the second day, but we can." "And your bones, they are solid, not hollow." "Solid all the way through." "That must make you very heavy." "Heavy enough." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are a strange species." "We get that a lot." Something shifted in her expression. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. She turned back to the view and said nothing more, but the silence between them was different after that. It was not the silence of a princess ignoring a servant. It was the silence of someone who had decided to pay attention. Over the following days, the questions continued. Elindra was curious in a way that reminded Kale of a scientist studying a new specimen. She asked about human biology, human history, human culture. She was fascinated by the concept of sweating. She could not believe that humans healed broken bones naturally, without medical intervention. She asked him about war, about Earth, about what it felt like to live in a body that was built to take damage and keep going. Kale answered honestly. He told her about human endurance, about how soldiers could march for days on minimal food, about how the human body could survive injuries that would kill most species in the galaxy. He told her about adrenaline, that chemical miracle that turned ordinary people into something fierce and fast when their lives were at risk. "Your body poisons itself to make you stronger," Elindra said, her eyes wide. "That's one way to put it." "That is terrifying." "Yeah," Kale said, "it kind of is." While his bond with Elindra slowly grew, Kale was also learning the politics of the court, and what he learned worried him. Prince Thavor, Elindra's father, was dying. A degenerative neural plague was eating away at his mind, and the best Velani physicians could only slow it, not stop it. He had months, perhaps less. When he died, the question of succession would tear the court apart. Elindra was his only heir, but in the eyes of the court she was weak. Her dim glow, the thing that made her different from every other Velani, was seen as a spiritual failing. The Velani believed that the brightness of one's bioluminescence reflected the strength of one's soul. A dim glow meant a dim spirit. It meant she was not fit to rule. There were other houses, other families, who believed they had a better claim, and someone among them was willing to kill a young girl to prove it. The third assassination attempt came on a day of ceremony. It was the Festival of Radiance, a celebration held every year to honor the Velani connection to light. The entire court gathered in the grand processional, a wide avenue of crystal that ran through the heart of the spire. Thousands of Velani walked together, their combined glow turning the avenue into a river of living color. Elindra walked near the front, as was her right as heir. Her dim light was almost swallowed by the brilliance around her. Kale walked behind her, the only dark figure in a sea of light. He felt the wrongness before he saw it. It was a sound, or rather the absence of one, a tiny gap in the harmonic hum of the spire's systems. Kale's ears, tuned by years of combat to notice things that did not belong, caught it like a tripwire. He looked up. A microdrone, no bigger than a coin, was descending from above. It was nearly invisible against the glowing ceiling. It carried two thin needles coated in something that glistened wetly. Neurotoxin. The Villani guards had not seen it. Their eyes were designed for detecting light patterns, not small dark objects against bright backgrounds. But Kale's eyes, human eyes, evolved on a world of predators and shadows, picked it out instantly. He moved. There was no thought involved. His body reacted before his mind caught up, that ancient human machinery of survival firing every piston at once. He lunged forward, wrapped one arm around Elindra and pulled her down. With his other hand, he reached up and caught the drone out of the air like a man catching a fly. He crushed it in his fist. One of the needles pierced his palm. He felt it go in, felt the cold spread of something wrong moving up his wrist, into his forearm. The avenue erupted into chaos. Guards swarmed in. Courtiers screamed and scattered, their glows flashing in panic. Kale dropped to one knee, his hand already swelling, the veins in his arm turning a dark, ugly blue. "Get her away," he said to the nearest guard, pushing Elindra toward safety. Then the pain hit. It was extraordinary. It felt like someone had replaced his blood with boiling acid. His vision went white. His muscles locked. He heard, from very far away, a Villani physician shouting that the toxin was a Class 7 neural agent, instantly lethal to any known species in the Dominion. But Kale was not any known species. His immune system, that brutal and stubborn machine built by millions of years of fighting off every disease, parasite, and poison Earth had ever thrown at humanity, went to war. His temperature spiked. His heart rate doubled. His liver and kidneys, those overworked human organs designed to process almost anything, began breaking down the toxin molecule by molecule. It took 4 hours. The Villani physicians worked on him the entire time, astonished that he was still alive after 4 minutes, let alone 4 hours. They pumped him full of broad-spectrum antivenoms and watched his body do most of the work itself. When Kale finally opened his eyes, he was in a medical ward. His arm was bandaged and numb. His entire body felt like it had been wrung out like a wet cloth. Elindra was sitting beside his bed. She was watching him with those wide, dark eyes, and there was something new in her expression. It was not fear exactly and not gratitude exactly. It was closer to wonder. "The physician said the toxin should have killed you in seconds," she said quietly. "Humans are stubborn," Kale managed. The word they used was impossible. "That too." She was quiet for a moment, then she leaned slightly forward. "You are very difficult to kill, aren't you?" Kale looked at her. Despite everything, despite the pain and the poison and the near death, he almost smiled. "It's kind of our whole thing," he said. Elindra's dim glow flickered once, soft and warm. And for the first time since Kale had arrived at the spire, it seemed just a little bit brighter. After the Festival of Radiance, everything changed. The assassination attempt had been public. Thousands of Villani had seen the human soldier catch a poisoned drone out of the air with his bare hand and survive a toxin that should have killed him instantly. The story spread through the spire, then through the city, then across the entire Dominion within days. Opinions split like cracked glass. Some Villani were impressed, in the quiet and grudging way that powerful people acknowledge strength in those they consider beneath them. Others were disturbed. A human had done what their finest guards had failed to do. That was not supposed to happen. It upset the natural order of things, the unspoken belief that the Villani were superior in all ways always. And in the shadows of the court, someone was very, very angry. Kale knew it. He could feel it the way a soldier feels the change in air before a storm. The failed assassination would not be the last. Whoever was trying to kill Elindra would try again, and next time they would plan for the human. So Kale decided to stop waiting and start hunting. The Villani had an intelligence service called the Luminance Bureau. It was ancient, sophisticated, and thoroughly compromised. Kale had known this since his second week at the spire. The Bureau reported to the court, and the court was a nest of factions and loyalties so tangled that any secret shared with one person was shared with 20. He could not trust them. He could not trust anyone in the spire. But he could trust humans. There were thousands of humans scattered across Ethara Prime. They worked in the lower levels of the city, maintaining the power grids, repairing the gravity anchors, running the waste processing systems, doing all the invisible work that kept the beautiful capital functioning. The Velani barely noticed them. To the glowing aristocrats of the Dominion, humans were part of the background, like furniture that happened to move. That was their mistake. Kale reached out carefully, a message to an old friend from his unit, now working as an engineer in the city's water purification sector. A quiet conversation with a human medic stationed at a Velani hospital. A favor called in from a supply sergeant who ran cargo routes through the spire's lower docks. Piece by piece, he built a network. It was small, informal, and completely invisible to Velani surveillance, because Velani surveillance was designed to monitor Velani behavior patterns. It tracked bioluminescent fluctuations, harmonic speech patterns, and energy signatures. It did not know what to do with humans, who did not glow, who communicated through crude audio frequencies, and whose body language was a mystery to the algorithms. The humans of Ethara Prime became Kale's eyes and ears. And what they found made his blood run cold. The attacks were not coming from a rival noble house. They were coming from inside the royal family itself. A human cargo handler reported unusual shipments being delivered to a private laboratory beneath the spire, ordered by someone with royal-level security clearance. A human maintenance worker noticed that access codes to the princess's wing had been copied 3 weeks before the drone attack. A human communications technician intercepted encrypted messages routed through a private channel that belonged to one person. Lord Kevarn, the Queen's own brother. Kale sat with this information for 2 days, turning it over in his mind, looking at it from every angle. Lord Kevarn was a respected member of the court. He controlled the Dominion's trade routes and had allies in every major house. He had access to the spire's security systems, to the princess's schedule, to the Queen's private council. He had the motive, the means, and the position. And he was family. On the 3rd day, Kale told Elindra. They were in her private study, a small room filled with data crystals and star charts. Elindra had been spending more time there recently, studying the history of the Dominion's succession laws, preparing herself for a future that everyone told her she was not worthy of. Kale closed the door and told her everything. Elindra listened without interrupting. Her face did not change. Her dim glow remained steady. When Kale finished, she was quiet for a long time. "My uncle," she said finally, "it was not a question." "I'm sorry." "Do not be sorry. I have always known what I am to the court. I am the heir that no one wants. My glow is dim. My father is dying. My mother holds power through willpower alone, and willpower has limits. My uncle has waited years for this moment." She paused. "I simply did not want to believe he would kill a child to get what he wanted." "People do terrible things for power," Kale said. "That's true in every species I've ever met." Elindra looked at him. "Even humans." "Especially humans. We've had thousands of years of practice." She almost smiled at that. "Almost. Then you understand this game." "I understand that it's not a game. Games have rules. This is survival." Elindra stood and walked to the window. The city of Ethara Prime spread out below them, glowing and beautiful and full of people who would decide her fate without asking her opinion. "What do we do?" she asked. "We gather proof. Real proof, the kind that even the court cannot ignore. And we protect your mother because if Kevarn moves against the Queen before your father dies, you lose your only political shield. And if he moves against me first, then he goes through me." Elindra turned and looked at him. She was young and she was scared, though she hid it well. But there was something else in her eyes, something that Kale recognized because he had seen it in the eyes of soldiers who had been pushed to their limit and decided to push back. It was resolve. "You are one human," she said. "He has an army. I've got something better than an army. I've got a network of people that nobody in this entire spire knows exists, because nobody in this spire thinks humans are worth paying attention to." Lord Kevarn made his first move against Kale 2 days later. It came not as violence but as politics, which in the Vellani court was often more dangerous. Kevarn stood before the Council of Luminance, the advisory body that served the crown, and formally objected to the presence of a human in the princess's personal guard. "It is an insult to our traditions," he said, his glow pulsing with practiced outrage. "It is an insult to our species. The princess of the Dominion should be protected by the finest Vellani warriors, not by a creature from a world that has not even mastered faster-than-light travel on its own." The council murmured in agreement. Several members nodded. Even those who privately supported the queen found it hard to argue against the basic logic of the complaint. A human guarding a Vellani princess was, by every measure of tradition and common sense, absurd. Queen Salith stood and faced her brother. "The human has done what our finest warriors could not," she said. Her voice was calm, but Kale, watching from the gallery, could see the tension in her shoulders. He identified and neutralized a threat that our entire security apparatus missed. He took a lethal dose of neurotoxin and survived. "I will not remove the one person who has proven capable of keeping my daughter alive because it offends your sense of tradition." The vote was close. The queen won by a single voice. Kevarn accepted the result with a gracious bow, but his eyes, when they found Kale in the gallery, were hard and dark and full of promise. That night Kale could not sleep. He sat in his quarters, a small room attached to the princess's wing, and thought about what was coming. Kevarn knew now that the queen would not give up her human shield willingly. That meant his next move would not be political. It would be direct. It would be violent. And it would come soon because Prince Thavor was fatting fast and the succession crisis was approaching like a wave that no one could stop. Kale needed more time. He needed more proof. He needed allies in places he did not yet have them. But mostly, he needed to be ready. He checked his weapons. He checked the security feeds to Elindra's chambers. He checked the access logs, the ventilation routes, the emergency exits. He mapped every corridor within 200 meters of the princess's rooms and memorized the locations of every structural weakness, every choke point, every shadow where a threat could hide. He was a human. He could not glow. He could not match the Vellani in elegance or beauty or lifespan, but he could prepare. He could plan. He could take punishment that would shatter their hollow bones and keep walking, and he could refuse with every fiber of his stubborn human body to let anyone hurt the girl he had sworn to protect. Outside his window, the city of Ithara Prime glowed in the darkness, beautiful and dangerous and full of enemies. Kale watched it for a long time. Then he began to sharpen his knife. Prince Thavor died on a Tuesday. It happened quietly, as such things often do. One moment his life signs were weak but present on the medical monitors. The next moment they were not. The physicians tried to revive him for 11 minutes before the queen raised her hand and told them to stop. The spire's great harmonic bell rang once, a sound so deep and low that it vibrated in the bones. Every Vellani on Ithara Prime stopped what they were doing and bowed their heads. The prince was gone. The Dominion had no ruler. By ancient law, a rite of ascension had to be performed within 3 days. The heir had to walk to the Hall of Luminance, the oldest chamber in the spire, place their hands on the throne of stars, and be judged by the crystal resonance of the ancient structure. If the crystals accepted the heir, their glow would fill the hall, and the succession was confirmed. If the heir did not appear, or if the heir was dead, the throne passed to the next house in line. Kale knew, with the certainty of a man watching a fuse burn toward a bomb, that Kevarn would not let Elindra reach the hall. He went to the queen immediately. "Your Grace, you need to move the ceremony forward. Tonight if possible. Every hour we wait gives him time to prepare." Salith shook her head. "The rite cannot be rushed. The preparation rituals take 2 full days. The court must gather. The crystals must be attuned. It is not a door you can simply walk through." "Then we have 2 days to keep Elindra alive." "Yes," the queen said. Her glow, usually so steady and controlled, flickered with something Kale had never seen in her before: fear. "Yes, we do." Kale spent those 2 days preparing for war. He moved Elindra to the most defensible section of the spire, a cluster of rooms with only 2 entry points. He called in every human contact he had in the city and positioned them at key infrastructure points: the power grid, the communications relay, the gravity anchor controls. He memorized the positions of every security camera, every guard station, every emergency bulkhead between Elindra's rooms and the Hall of Luminance. He slept for 2 hours total. His body, trained by years of deployment, accepted this without complaint. Humans could do that. Push past the edge of normal endurance and keep functioning on a cocktail of adrenaline, training, and pure stubborn will. The coup began at sundown on the 2nd day. It started with the lights going out. The spire's bioluminescent power grid, a system that had run without interruption for 9,000 years, went dark. Every crystal panel, every glowing wall, every light source in the building died at once. For the Vellani, who navigated primarily by light and whose eyes were designed for brightness, the sudden darkness was crippling. Kale heard screams echoing through the corridors, the sound of panic spreading through a species that had never known true darkness in their own home. For Kale, it was Tuesday. Human eyes adapted to darkness. It was what they were built for. Millions of years of hunting in the twilight hours of Earth, of navigating forests and caves and nighttime plains, had given humans pupils that could dilate wide enough to catch the faintest photon. Kale could see, not well but enough. "Stay behind me," he told Elindra. "Do not let go of my hand." "I cannot see anything," she whispered. Her dim glow, usually barely visible, was now the only light source in the room. It turned her into a ghost, a faint white shape in the absolute blackness. "I can," Kale said. "That's enough." The first attackers came through the east corridor. They were not Vellani soldiers. They were biomechanical sentinels, the automated war machines that guarded the spire's most sensitive areas. Kevarn had reprogrammed them. They moved through the darkness on multiple legs, their optical sensors switching to thermal imaging, hunting for the warm signature of a living body. Kale heard them before he saw them: the click of metal limbs on crystal floor, the hum of targeting systems coming online. He pushed Elindra into an alcove, drew his sidearm and waited. The first sentinel came around the corner at full speed. It was the size of a large dog, built from white metal and synthetic muscle, with 4-bladed arms and a sensor array where a face should have been. It locked onto Kale's heat signature and lunged. Kale shot it twice in the sensor array. It staggered. He shot it a 3rd time and it dropped, twitching and sparking on the floor. 2 more came behind it, then 3 more. The next 4 minutes were the longest of Kale's life. He fought in the darkness, in a corridor barely wide enough for 2 Vellani to walk side by side, against machines designed to kill. He used his pistol until it ran dry, then picked up one of the sentinel's severed bladed arms and used that instead. The machines were fast and strong, but they were designed to fight Vellani, beings with hollow bones and delicate bodies. They were not designed for a human who could take a hit from a metal limb that would shatter a Vellani ribcage and keep fighting. A sentinel slashed his left arm. He felt the blade scrape against bone and ignored it. Another caught him across the back. He stumbled, turned the stumble into a pivot, and drove the bladed arm through the sentinel's core processor. When the last machine fell, Kale was bleeding from 4 different wounds. His left arm hung at an angle that suggested something was broken or close to it. His breathing was ragged. "We need to move," he said. They moved. The corridors of the spire had become a battlefield. Kale could hear fighting in other sections, the sounds of the Queen's loyalist guards engaging Kevarn's forces. Plasma fire lit up the darkness in brief, blinding flashes. Somewhere above them, an explosion shook the walls. Kale navigated by memory, leading Elindra through service corridors and maintenance shafts that the Vellani used but rarely thought about. These passages were small, designed for the utility workers who maintained the spire's systems. Vellani workers used them. Human workers used them more. "The Hall of Luminance is 6 levels below us," Elindra said. Her voice was steady, far steadier than it had any right to be. "There is a service shaft that connects to the old ceremonial passages. I studied the spire's architecture when I was 12. I know the way." Kale looked at her in the faint light of her own glow. She was frightened, yes, but she was thinking clearly and she was not falling apart. "Show me," he said. They descended through the spire's skeleton, through passages that grew older and rougher as they went deeper. The walls changed from smooth crystal to ancient stone. The air grew cold and still. Behind them, Kale could hear pursuit. Vellani soldiers, Kevarn's men, moving fast through the corridors above, and something else. Heavier footsteps, more sentinels. At one point, the passage narrowed to a gap barely wide enough for Kale's shoulders. He had to turn sideways to fit. A Vellani soldier appeared behind them, saw Kale stuck in the narrow gap, and charged. Kale grabbed the soldier by the front of his armor with his one good hand, pulled him into the gap, and slammed his forehead into the soldier's face. The Vellani's hollow facial bones cracked like eggshells. He dropped without a sound. 2 more soldiers saw this happen. They stopped. They looked at each other. They did not follow. Kale and Elindra reached the old ceremonial passages. These were wide, ancient corridors lined with dead crystal that had not glowed in centuries. The Hall of Luminance was close. Kale could feel the air changing, becoming cleaner, charged with something electric and old. But between them and the hall, standing in the corridor like a wall, was Lord Kevarn. He was not alone. He had 6 soldiers with him and he himself was changed. Military-grade combat implants bulged beneath his skin, grafted onto his body in the hours since the coup began. His glow was harsh and bright, amplified by the augmentations. In his hand, he carried a plasma blade, a weapon that could cut through ship armor. "The human," Kevarn said. He looked at Kale the way one might look at an insect that had somehow survived being stepped on. "You have been troublesome." Kale stood in the corridor, bleeding, broken, holding a salvaged sentinel blade in his right hand. His left arm was useless. His vision was blurring at the edges. He had been fighting for over an hour without rest. "I get that a lot," he said. Kevarn gestured to his soldiers. "Kill him. Bring the girl to me alive." The soldiers moved forward. Kale met them. What happened next would become a story told across the Dominion for generations. 6 Vellani soldiers, trained warriors of noble blood, engaged a single injured human in a stone corridor beneath the oldest building in their civilization. The fight lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, 4 soldiers were unconscious. One had 2 broken arms and the 6th had fled, running back the way he came, screaming about a death walker who could not be stopped. Kale stood among them, swaying on his feet. He had taken new injuries. His ribs were cracked. A plasma graze had burned a line across his shoulder. Blood ran freely from a cut above his eye. He looked at Kevarn. Kevarn looked at the human, at the carnage around him, and for the first time in his life, felt something his species rarely experienced. Doubt. Then he raised his plasma blade and charged. The blade caught Kale across the chest. He felt it burn through his tactical vest and into the flesh beneath. The pain was white-hot and absolute. Any Vellani would have died instantly. Any sane person would have fallen. Kale stepped into the cut. He closed the distance between them, inside the reach of the plasma blade, so close that Kevarn could feel the heat of human blood on his armor. He grabbed Kevarn's sword arm with his good hand and twisted. The arm broke at the elbow with a sound like a tree branch snapping. Kevarn screamed. It was a sound of pure shock. He had never felt real pain before. His species, with their delicate bones and carefully managed lives, simply did not experience this kind of damage. His nervous system, unprepared for the sensation, overwhelmed him completely. He collapsed. Kale stood over him, chest wound smoking, blood dripping onto the ancient stone floor. He looked down at the lord who had tried to murder a girl for a throne, and he said nothing at all. Then he turned to Elindra, who stood at the end of the corridor, her dim glow the only light in the darkness. "The hall is through those doors," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Go claim your throne." She looked at him, at his wounds, his blood, his stubborn and unbroken body. Then she walked past him, past the fallen soldiers, past her broken uncle, and she pushed open the doors to the Hall of Luminance. The Hall of Luminance was the oldest room in the Dominion. It had been carved from a single crystal, a natural formation deep beneath the surface of Ithara Prime, shaped and polished by the first Velani builders 10,000 years before humans had learned to make fire. The walls rose in smooth curves that met far overhead in a ceiling that looked like the inside of a shell. Every surface was covered in crystalline structures, thousands of them, growing from the walls and floor and ceiling like frozen flowers. They were dark. They had been dark since the power had been cut, but these crystals were not connected to the spire's power grid. They were older than the power grid. They were older than the spire itself. They ran on something deeper, something that the Velani understood in their bones even if they could not explain it in words. At the center of the hall stood the throne of stars. It was not a chair. It was a column of crystal, taller than a Velani, wider than a human's arm span, and covered in patterns that shifted and changed depending on who was looking at them. It had accepted every true ruler the Dominion had ever known. It had rejected pretenders and usurpers and frauds. It was, in the deepest sense, the heart of the Velani people. Elindra stood before it. She was small. She was dim. Her glow was so faint that she was barely visible in the darkness of the hall. Behind her, through the open doors, came the sounds of distant fighting, the last echoes of her uncle's failed coup being crushed by her mother's loyalists, and the unexpected intervention of Kale's human network, who had seized control of the power grid and communications relay, and were now systematically shutting down every system Kevarn's forces relied on. But in the hall there was silence. Elindra walked forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the crystal floor. She thought about her father, who had been kind and quiet and who had loved her without reservation. She thought about her mother, who had been strong enough to put a human soldier in her daughter's shadow because she cared more about keeping her child alive than about what the court thought. She thought about Kale, who was bleeding and broken in the corridor behind her, and who had refused, with a stubbornness that defied all logic and reason, to let anyone pass. She reached the throne of stars and placed her hands on its surface. The crystal was cold. It felt like touching deep water, like reaching into something vast and ancient that stretched far beneath her feet. She could feel it examining her, reading her in ways that had nothing to do with biology or genetics or the brightness of her skin. For a terrible, endless moment, nothing happened. The darkness held. The crystals remained still. The hall was silent and cold, and Elindra felt the weight of 10,000 years of tradition pressing down on her, telling her what the court had always told her, what the whispers and the sidelong glances and the pitying looks had always said. "You are not enough. You are too dim. You are too weak. You are not fit for this." She closed her eyes. And she thought about what Kale had told her once, during one of their quiet conversations in the Academy gardens. She had asked him how humans survived, not as individuals but as a species. How did a people with no glow, no natural weapons, no armor, no venom, no speed, no ancient civilization to guide them, survive on a world that was trying to kill them from the day they were born? Kale had thought about it for a moment. Then he had said, "We just didn't stop." Elindra opened her eyes. She pressed her hands harder against the crystal, and she refused to let go. It started slowly, a flicker of warmth beneath her palms, a vibration so faint it might have been imagined. Then a soft sound, like a chord struck on an instrument too large to see, resonating through the floor, through the walls, through the ancient bones of the hall itself. The crystals began to glow. Not with the blinding, fierce radiance that the histories described when the great kings and queens of the past had claimed the throne. Not with the overwhelming power that the court expected and demanded. The light that filled the Hall of Luminance was soft and warm and steady. It spread like dawn breaking over a quiet horizon, gentle and unhurried, filling every corner and every shadow without force or violence. It was a dim light, but it was everywhere. It reached the ceiling, and the ceiling sang back. It reached the walls, and the walls hummed in harmony. It reached the floor, and the floor vibrated with a resonance that had not been felt in the hall for generations. The throne of stars was not measuring brightness. It had never been measuring brightness. It was measuring something that the Vellani, in their obsession with light and radiance and spectacle, had forgotten to value. Endurance, resolve, the willingness to stand when everything said to fall. The crystals filled the hall with Elindra's light, and her light was enough. Outside, the fighting stopped. Through the open doors of the hall, the glow spilled into the corridor like water. Vellani soldiers on both sides of the conflict lowered their weapons and stared. Courtiers who had been hiding in sealed rooms felt the vibration in the walls and understood what it meant. The throne had accepted her. Kale saw the light from where he lay on the corridor floor. He had collapsed after the doors closed, his body finally surrendering to the accumulated damage it had been ignoring for the past 2 hours. He lay on his back on the ancient stone, looking at the ceiling, and watched as Elindra's warm, steady glow washed over the walls above him. He smiled. It hurt, but he smiled. The hours that followed were a blur. Medical teams arrived. The Queen's forces secured the spire. Kevarn and his surviving allies were taken into custody. The power grid was restored. The humans who had helped Kale were found at their posts, still holding the infrastructure they had seized, still waiting for orders. Kale was taken to the best medical facility on Ithara Prime. Vellani surgeons, working alongside human medics who had been flown in from across the city, spent 6 hours repairing the damage to his body. 3 cracked ribs, a broken arm, a plasma burn across his chest that had come within centimeters of his heart, 17 cuts of varying depth, tissue damage from the earlier neurotoxin that had weakened his left hand. Blood loss significant enough that it would have killed a Vellani 3 times over. When the chief surgeon finished the operation, she stood outside the recovery room and said to her colleague, "I do not understand how this species survives on its home planet, let alone anywhere else." Her colleague, a young Vellani who had watched Kale's vital signs throughout the procedure, shook his head. "I watched his body fight the anesthesia," he said. "His system kept trying to wake up. It kept trying to return to combat readiness. Even unconscious, his body was prepared to fight." "That is not a survival trait," the chief surgeon said. "That is a design flaw." "And yet," her colleague said, "he is alive." 2 days later, Elindra's coronation was formalized. She stood in the Hall of Luminance, now fully lit and restored before every surviving member of the court. She wore the white and silver robes of the Vellani monarchy, and her dim glow, once a source of shame, filled the hall with its quiet warmth. She spoke to the Dominion. She spoke about strength, about how the Vellani had measured it for 10,000 years in brightness and power and spectacle, about how they had built an empire on the belief that the strongest light was the best light, the most worthy, the most true. She spoke about a different kind of strength, the kind that did not shine but endured, the kind that held on when letting go was easier, the kind that got up after falling, not because it felt no pain, but because it refused to let pain be the final word. She did not name Kale Morrow. She did not have to. Everyone in the hall knew who she was talking about. In the days that followed, Kale was awarded a title that had never existed before. Shield Sovereign, the first non-Velani to hold a formal rank in the royal court in the entire history of the Dominion. The court accepted it quietly, not because they liked it, but because they had seen what happened to the last person who tried to get through the human to reach the princess. On the evening of the coronation, Kale stood on a balcony overlooking the city. His arm was in a sling. His chest was wrapped in bandages. He was standing only because sitting hurt more. Elindra found him there. She walked up beside him and stood in silence for a while, looking out at the city they had both nearly died to protect. Her glow was soft in the evening air, warm and steady like a lantern that someone had placed on the railing. "You almost died," she said. "Almost doesn't count," Kale replied. The surgeon said it was closer than almost. Surgeons always say that. It's how they justify their fees. Elindra turned to look at him. She was taller than him now, having grown in the weeks since they first met, but she still had to look slightly down to meet his eyes. It struck Kale, not for the first time, that she was going to be a remarkable ruler. Not because of her glow or her bloodline or her title, but because she had learned something that most people in power never learn. She had learned what it meant to be underestimated and to survive it. "My mother told you to protect me with your life," she said. "She did. And if I told you to stop, to rest, to let someone else carry this burden?" Kale considered the question. He thought about his barracks on Rel 4, the half-assembled rifle, the boring and safe and meaningless life he had left behind. He thought about the scorch marks on the walls of her wing, the drone in the Crystal Avenue, the darkness of the spire, the corridor where he had broken a lord's arm with his bare hand. He thought about a dim-glowing girl who had placed her hands on an ancient throne and refused to let go. "Respectfully, Your Majesty," he said, "no." Elindra's glow flickered. It was the Velani equivalent of a smile, a gesture so rare and genuine that most humans would never see it in their lifetime. She turned back to the view. They stood together in the quiet evening, the human and the Empress, watching the lights of the city bloom one by one in the deepening dark. Two people who had been told, by everything and everyone around them, that they were not enough. And they had answered that judgment the only way they knew how. They had endured. Far below, in the streets and corridors and engine rooms of Ithara Prime, the humans of the Dominion went about their work. They fixed the things that were broken. They kept the lights running. They maintained the systems that the beautiful, glowing civilization above them depended on but rarely thought about. They had always been there, in the background, unnoticed, underestimated. But they were there. And they were not going anywhere.